News Street Politics, the best hood channel on YouTube, and we back on the east side of South Central with them neighborhood East Coast Crips. Now, for everybody that's thinking that Big U indictment is going crazy, one of the top guys on the east side was making Big U and some of his co-defendants look like they was running a circus on the west side. We got Paul Wallace, aka Lil Doc Thone, from 6'9" East Coast Crip, Death Lane.
In the six packs where the homies at, deuce to the 9. 90 days, see the bird out, cause a block hot, they pursuing crime. Free the real niggas locked up, you know the ones down that's doing time. Rest in peace, Lil Ezel will prevail in due time.
Man, I'm Lil Doc, aka Lil Doc Thone, 69th Street, neighborhood East Side neighborhood, East Coast Crip.
Now in 2020, Lil Doc, who was arguably the undisputed leader of all neighborhood East Coast sets, went down on the same type of indictment that Big U was alleged in.
Where he getting his information? Because he wasn't the leader of all East Coast sets. The 6 dudes.
RICO. Now there's a lot of similarities between what happened with Doc on the east side and what's going on with Big U and his co-defendants in their situation as well. Like I said, RICO charges, murder, extortion. But the thing is, multiple dudes from East Coast that were at one time reputable OG members took the stand on Doc, testified, man. Like I said, some older homies that did have some pull on the east side over here got on the stand. We got somebody in this case that was pimping their underage granddaughter, bank robbery crews, somebody who alleged that they started 7-6 East Coast, as well as allegations of Lil Doc extorting a weed shop on the east side for a job. And everybody in here career criminals with multiple state cases, and everybody done touched the feds as well. And you see a grip of older dudes making statements on Doc Thone. Now, like I said, it's alleged that Doc was the boss of all bosses when it came to that East Coast cripping. And we spoke multiple times about EC, about how they have real unity with they cripping over there on the east side, from Pacoima to Riverside to South Central to Carson. All of they sets get along, but we will talk about a situation where there was some internal beef between East Coast as well.
So when the young homies that want to be gang banging and acting ignorant still and trying to be young, I'm 18 still acting like they want to gang bang, you know, we tell them too, you know, shake the hand, homie. And he can be from East Coast Crip, but he my little homie, but I'm going to tell him to do that. Now, if he shake it and half-ass shake it or he try to act funny, then I'm going to let him do that in front of Smoke and Pork. And then we're going to pull him to the side, take him up in the cell and be like, why you do that, homie? Why you disrespect me like that as your G homie?
Now, some key differences that this RICO had when compared to that Big U RICO, number one is the geography, the east side to the west side. What you see in this RICO was no games being played. It's no internet games, no internet beef, no question marks about the gang banging that was going on around this whole situation. And we all know, everybody from the city know, the east side is always different from the west side, man. And the key things about the hoods and the dudes on the west side, sometimes they get the label of being Hollywood because of the geographics being closer to some more diverse areas in the city. You know, before the internet and the cell phone age took off, you didn't see a lot of east side dudes on the west side in places like Santa Monica, Palisades, Melrose, La Brea, Fairfax. You know, you ran into east side dudes still in the hood on the west side, maybe some parties, maybe when they had the little teen clubs in Hollywood. But for the most part, there was some segregation when it came to east side dudes bleeding into these diverse areas. But west side dudes will have the opportunity to rock with different crowds, which is how they got that moniker of being Hollywood, which is what we see in this Big U indictment. We got dudes like Brick Baby, Loose Cannon on the internet playing games, running content, just doing a whole bunch of weird stuff. We see Big U with NFL players, NBA players, clubs, all kind of shit. On this East Coast indictment, nothing but pure gang banging. No games being played, bodies is getting dropped, and gang banging is really playing out the way it should be played out, so to speak. And I say that because something else we've seen with this Big U situation is kind of like somewhat villainizing these guys in this modern day gangster era. But my thing is, the story should be told the same way that the stories of Al Capone and John Gotti and all them East Coast mobsters It should be represented how the East Coast mob was represented. It's really no different. These are modern day mobsters, modern day gangsters. And over the years, so many people have celebrated the likes of these Italian mobsters from New York or Chicago, but everybody want to act funny when we have our own modern day gangsters who is doing the same as those guys. But also, like we've touched on before, the basics of East Coast Crip. It was alleged that, like I said, Doc was running everything, which would mean 13 individual sets. If you break it down a 6-pack into individual blocks, it was said that Doc was the standard. Doc was the program. And we know as neighborhood Crips, we know the enemies that's coming with that. They number one enemies, the Swans and the Hoovers, and they've had historical beefs with the Broadways in which they've cleaned things up with the Kitchens in which they've cleaned things up with the Avalons and the Main Streets who they've also cleaned things up with. And of course, the big situation that happened that Doc Thone was a part of, the peace treaty with the Florencia.
You know, so for the record, the beef between East Coast and Florence is over.
It's over. It's a wrap for that.
Now, right after that peace treaty happened with Florence, this is when the RICO came down from Doc. But this is not his first time running into the feds. There was only one murder that's alleged in this indictment, but we're gonna speak about other murders that he was involved with, that he admitted to, as well as all the dirty work the confidential informants was taking part of. Now, a couple key things about Doc. It said that he landed on the east side off Wadsworth in about 71, around the inception of this East Coast Crip. And like many stories have been told, it didn't take him long to rise up in the ranks over here on the east side. But situations that transpired in the 80s affected Doc all the way up until this indictment. The first situation was when he got shot by his homie from Swans in 82, where he was hit in the back and it caused nerve damage in both of his legs, causing him to be disabled for a period of time. And once he was able to regain his walk, he would never be the same and would never fully recover from those shells. Now, 2 years after that period, Doc was hanging out at a park celebrating the fact that he was able to get back on his feet when he was shot 7 times, allegedly by Lil Scooby from 7-4 Hoop, where he was shot multiple times in his biceps and in both hips. Now, later on that same year in 84, he was shot again with a shotgun in the lower back in the Swans, this time outside of Fremont High School. And it seems like those 3 events were the turning point that made Doc the individual that he is even today. Now, the federal complaint in 2020 alleged 26 overt acts that contributed to the RICO charge on Doc. And of course, just like Big U, they alleging that Doc was spearheading a criminal enterprise in the East Coast Crips and used murder, witness intimidation, extortion, and drug trafficking to maintain a strong grip on his leadership position. Now, Doc is officially from 69th Street East Coast, but we know the 6-pack consists of 6 Deuce, 6'6", 6'8", and 6'9". Doc stayed on 65th and Broadway, which is going to be a main staple for a lot of events that's alleged in this indictment, and was a main hangout spot for a lot of dudes from the coast. And it's also common knowledge that the 6-pack is somewhat of the heartbeat of the neighborhood East Coast Crips. But aside from that, another key thing about this indictment was that the feds did use Doc's interviews with Kev Mack against him, where they alleged that he liked to brag about his violence. But these interviews also showed Lil Doc with a positive and infectious personality. And I definitely recommend y'all checking them out because they were positive regardless of how they respond. But we know his rap sheet went all the way back to about 89 with the violence, when it started with cocaine possession and manslaughter charges, also including multiple gun charges and assaults behind the walls.
Oh shit, this evil. I heard about them. You know, they was killing like a motherfucker like me. And I'm like, damn, they put in work, got murders under their belt like a motherfucker. I got murders under mine. They worship the devil. And I was like, damn, that's evil from Swan. I want to meet him. He was like, what's up, little Doc?
Now, the indictment, like I said, alleges that Doc participated in a murder, but it's only talking about one. But we got to rewind the clock back to February 9th, 2003, a homicide that's not alleged in the indictment that Doc beat back in 2004. And that's the murder of his own homie, Ray Pickett, aka Ray Dog from 6'6" East Coast Crip. And at this time, Doc was only 4 years removed from prison for another murder that he went down for in '89. Now, even though this is not a part of the indictment, prosecutors wanted to use this case against Doc for a couple reasons. Number one, to of course show the jury that he's capable of murder. But the key thing is he beat the murder, but after he beat it, he did a lot of bragging about why he beat it and that he actually did do the murder.
She said, now you in there for murder, and and I'm in there for a double murder. He said, I should not kill. I didn't kill. I don't give I didn't kill a few motherfuckers, so I know I'm going to hell.
So the second reason they wanted to bring this case up was to debunk the reason why he got this case dismissed, even though he couldn't be tried for it again. So at this time in 2003, it said that everybody's kicking it on 65th, which is one of the main hangout spots for everybody in the six pack and a lot of East Coast members, period. Doc lived on 65th at the time. And according to a female named Nicole Climbs that he was messing with, a bunch of dudes from the coast was outside, drinking, smoking, cutting hair, just chilling. Now the key thing is, like I said, the female he was dating was Nicole Climbs. Prior to this situation, Nicole had relations with Ray Dog. And it was said that Ray Dog had made comments to Nicole, who also lived on 65th, to clean up some of the hair that was being cut off the floor. But he also made some disrespectful comments that went along with that as well. Now, Nicole ended up taking a stand on this case. She said she didn't want to be there, but the feds had threatened her with jail time. And her, like many of these witnesses, was scared to take the stand on Doc. As we see, there was 2 jurors that had to be dismissed because they said their life was in danger after finding out the type of person Doc Thone was. One of the dudes brought his mama to court to help him get off the jury stand because he said he didn't want to be a part of it. Another juror said she didn't like how gang members were in the audience watching the trial. She felt intimidated and was dismissed. So Nicole Climbs felt like a lot of other people in here not wanting to testify on Doc due to potential repercussions from the coast. But she's the one that testified and said Ray Dog got disrespectful towards her and that she was dealing with Doc at the time and previously dealing with Ray Dog. But the situation with Ray Dog happened when they was kids, when she was like 14. So she's saying that it was nothing. But there was 2 confidential witnesses that Doc talked to about this murder, bragging that he did it, that took the stand on him in this case. Derek Angelo Banks, aka Too Cool, from 7-6 East Coast, and Ashanti Harrison, aka Devil, from 6 Deuce East Coast.
And they would see Doc was tight with Big Too Cool from 7-6. And both of them was just dogs too. And Doc was tight with Big Bub and Big Quake from 6 Deuce.
Now, Too Cool is a dirty character in the gang. He's known as CW2, and he was the self-proclaimed shot caller of 7-6 East Coast. He steady started 7-6, and it was Big Doc Thone, Lil Doc's big homie, who convinced Too Cool to put the East Coast on the 7-6 and become a part of these neighborhood Crips. So this is an original member from the coast before Doc even got there. And he refers to himself as a triple OG. Now he claims that Doc confessed the murder of Ray Dog to him back in 2004 when Doc went down for the case. He goes on to testify that Doc told him he started smacking on Nicole and Ray Dog didn't know about it until that day, which is why he got disrespectful with Nicole while they was kicking it on 65th. Now he said Ray Dog was a youngster, a young dude, young homie. He was 35 at the time, and of course, Doc had the juice, especially in 2003. Now Ray Dog's disrespect of Nicole seemingly caused Lil Doc to have some words with him over what he was saying. Now again, these dudes is drinking, they outside, they hanging out, his females around, his homies around. Nobody's gonna be taking disrespect. Now at that point, it said that Ray Dog banged 6'6" on Doc and Doc banged 6'9" back. And they proceeded to go their separate ways with Ray Dog still hanging out on the block. Now at this time, Nicole Klein, who like I said also stayed on 65th, had went into the house for a second and then dipped out to go get some food. She said when she got back, about 30 minutes later, 65th and Broadway was taped off. Whole scene shut down, murder scene. Now allegedly, Doc told Too Cool that he felt like Ray Dog was trying to embarrass him and that he had to make an example out of Ray Dog in front of the homies. And at this point, it said that Doc returned back to 65th with a pistol and aired Ray Dog out, putting 7 in his body, including 1 to the left side of his forehead, killing him right here on 65th and Broadway. Now, there were originally 2 eyewitnesses to this murder, but one of them already died before they can testify against Doc in this RICO case. Too Cool was saying what Doc told him when they were sitting in the county together. Of course, Too Cool was on an unrelated case, but he said when they was going to court in the tank, this is what Doc told him. But confidential witness 4 was the eyewitness to this murder, Thomas Ristic, who also went by the name of Eric Burrell. Now, the key thing with Tommy Ristic, this is a smoker. So he's not from the neighborhood, he's not from East Coast. He happened to get out of the county earlier this day and made his way over to 65th with his wife and the kids in the car to buy some pills. So when he pulls up to 65th, he say he see dudes hanging out and he gets out the car. As soon as he gets out the car, he say he sees somebody bussing and he see Ray Dog drop to the floor, hitting his face on the cement from falling off the line. He said he was so dope sick at the time that he stepped over Ray Dog's body and still went in the house to get his pills. But he also said that he seen somebody running from the scene who he pointed out to be Doc Thone. But at that time, all he did was get in the car and he went back home. Now, the key thing is he didn't want to cooperate with the police. He was trying to stay low key because he still had to get his dope from over there off 65th. But he calls the police when he gets home a couple days later because he's worried about Ray Dog and didn't know if the dude survived or not. But he ended up calling from his actual number. The police traced the call back to his crib and pulled up on him looking for that statement. So he said he was nervous and initially made some bad statements. He said some Latino men had pulled up in a Honda and did a drive-by on 65th. So he pretty much made himself null and void in the situation. But after he made that statement, of course, he was picked up again and taken to that room where detectives pressed him harder, and he ended up picking Doc out of a lineup saying Doc is the one that ran when he seen Ray Dog get killed. Now, this turned out to be a pivotal turn in the case, saying Doc ran away because, like we said, he was shot in the spine when he was 16. So he has a hobble walk where he kind of hops and walks a little bit funny. So Doc used this to his advantage. And when he went down on this case, he called physicians and doctors as expert witnesses to basically show, demonstrate, and explain to the judge, the jury, and the prosecutors that it's physically no way that he could run. And it was also said that the assailant not only ran, but jumped over a wall. And the doctor said that it was physically impossible for Doc to be able to do that.
She said, everybody talking about you was down, you know, and you a rider, but you in the wheelchair now. That's stuff. They put cuz in the wheelchair, like as if you through vote. And I was like, yeah. So I was telling her, I said, watch when I get out of here. I'm killing every motherfucking bang up.
That's how we got the murder of Ray Dog dismissed. But he went on to tell all his homies that he had to make an example of Ray Dog.
I was like, shit, could motherfucker shoot me and I'm in the wheelchair and then gonna shoot me again and I'm in the wheelchair and shit. So I was like, I'm shooting everybody. I was like, I want everybody with a limp. All you motherfuckers just a limp.
Now that was in 2003. Here we are in 2021. Both Ristic and Too Cool are taking a stand. The reason why Tommy Ristic was here is because he was catching cases in between that time. He ended up going down in Burbank trying to solicit a minor for some sex. And at the time of Doc's trial, he was facing 1 count of rape, 2 counts of digital penetration with a foreign object, 1 count of sodomy, and a potential false imprisonment or kidnapping because he got a female in his car and locked her in there. So he was looking at a minimum of 32 years based on the case that he caught in 2020. As soon as he got in the room with them people, he said, man, I seen a murder. He told them he was a witness of the homicide back in 2003 and was ready to tell it all. But the crazy thing is, this dude didn't even negotiate to get his sentencing reduced for cooperating as a witness in this RICO trial. It wasn't until this 2021 trial that Tommy Ristic says he saw Doc, he still said Doc ran, still said Doc jumped over the wall, but again, he couldn't point Doc out as the shooter. One of the reasons is because he was so focused on getting his dope that day. All he seen was who he pointed out as Doc running. But Too Cool, who took the stand on Doc in regards to this case as well, explained to the jury how Doc bragged about bringing medical experts up there to prove that he couldn't run even though he could run. He said he did everything they said he did, but medical records will prove that he couldn't do it. Now, Too Cool is probably the biggest rat on this case. I'm not gonna lie, this is one of the nastiest people that we may ever talk about on this channel. Like I said, this is a self-proclaimed triple OG who's been around for a long time, went down on federal cases, and is a career criminal, and has hung out with Doc too many times to count. He went on to describe Doc as the boss of all bosses and said nobody wants to go against Lil Doc. And he said this murderer Ray Dog was the only time he ever seen a homie kill another homie and have to face no repercussions behind it. Nobody wanted to question Doc for killing another member of East Coast. He said Doc was above a DP. He pointed out a time in '89 when Doc was in jail for that manslaughter case where Doc ran into Lil Scooby from 7-4 Hoopin', the same dude that shot him, and Doc took it upon himself without consulting anybody to attack the Hoovers and a riot broke out. Now, things didn't go as planned, but he said even though Doc didn't consult anybody about jumping the riot off, nobody wanted to question Doc all the way back in '89. That's how much juice he had in his hood and behind the walls. He said Doc was running 6'9" by the 90s, and then eventually went to take over all of the 6-pack, and then eventually running all of the coast. Now we know the 6-pack is really the heartbeat for the East Coast Crips. So Doc was having a lot of power at this time. And with that power, we know it comes with a lot of beef. Like I said previously, of course they beefing with the Hoovers, they beefing with the Swans, and the main beef that everybody knows about was they war that they had with Florencia.
Like they'll pay a visit to our apartments, we'll pay a visit to like 7-4, 5-9, 5 Deuce.
Now the crazy thing is, Too Cool was dealing with F-13 in 2009 in the middle of the war. It said that he was buying 5 to 6 keys a month from these dudes and serving a lot of weight throughout LA. And this resulted in an indictment where 34 people, a part of Florencia, of course, one was including 7-6 East Coast and Too Cool, all went down on a conspiracy to distribute controlled substance, also possession with intent to distribute a controlled substance, money laundering, possession of firearms, aiding and abetting, and use of a communication facility in committing a felony drug offense. There were 60 counts on this indictment, and this is the first time in 2009 Too Cool started working for the FBI. He flipped on everybody from F-13 and took the stand against these guys. He was facing a 10-year minimum. His testimony got him dropped down 18 levels in the feds. He ended up serving 2 years and got a time served when he came back to be sentenced. Now, the crazy thing is, he alleges that East Coast knew about him snitching on F-13 and said they was cool with it because the coast was beefing with Florencia. Now, after he gets out the feds in this case, he's back on the streets with his homies, like I said, racking up charges. But the feds come to Too Cool in 2015 and say they want him to work for them to take down some of the violent crime off the streets and in his neighborhood? And he says yes. Now, he said at this point, he just started backdooring people, meeting up with different people, getting their locations, getting their phone numbers, sending it to the feds, and watching people go down. And in this case alone, when he was on the stand in 2021, he was still bringing up random people. On the stand, he brought up Kelsey from 190, G-Man from 11-8, Quake from 6 Deuce, Ronnie Bound from 6'8", and PP from Q102, all top members from the coast. He was still name dropping. Now, the crazy thing is, him and Doc was still cool at this time in 2015. It was alleged in the indictment that Doc was extorting a weed shop just like Big U and them, which we gonna speak on, but the weed shop was on 62nd and Broadway in the 6 Deuces. He said that Doc called him up for backup against the 6 Deuces just in case they had to shoot it out. And one thing that people may not know is 6ix9ine and 6 Deuce have went to war before, and bodies have dropped when they was beefing. So Doc was not afraid to go at his homies and impose his power. Too Cool said he's never seen anybody more powerful than Doc. And in that 2003 murder case, he said Doc smiled when he told him about killing Ray Dog. And he said anybody else from 6'6" or any other set from the coast try to come up and testify against him at that time, they was gonna meet the same fate as Ray Dog. But some key things changed in 2016 for Doc and for Too Cool. It said that Doc had called up Too Cool one day to come to his crib. Too Cool went over there to kick it. Later that day, the feds ended up raiding Doc's house, and he ends up going down into federal custody at MDC for felon in possession of firearms and ammunition. At this point, Doc starts to put the word out that Too Cool is a rat. He figured Too Cool was the last person to be at his house before this raid, and that Too Cool led the feds to Doc's house. Now, the crazy thing is, the feds and Too Cool alleged that it was strictly coincidental that both of those things happened that same day, because the feds said they didn't send Too Cool over there to Doc's house for any intelligence that day. They was operating on a whole nother situation that didn't involve Too Cool, but Doc still gave the word out that Too Cool was a rat after this situation. And at this point, once the feds realized Too Cool was compromised, they told him to step back because they didn't want him killed over here in the coast. But at this time, after he's done working with the feds, Too Cool goes down for pimping his granddaughter, a minor at the time. And mind you, he was still on federal probation from being a snitch in that F-13 case. But this is what I meant when I said this is probably the nastiest person we gonna touch on this channel. Pimping his granddaughter, his underage granddaughter. And at this time, the jailhouse diagnoses this dude with depressive disorder, psychotic symptoms, antisocial personality disorder, and hallucinations. But I think all that was a play, because while he was sitting down, he still was calling the feds, acting like he was a member of the team. He called his federal handlers and asked them if they can put an extra TV remote in the pod because they only had 2. Too Cool is crazy, man. This dude right here is the nastiest homeboy, snitch, anything, man. Too Cool is a piece of work. But he was sentenced to 5 years for pimping his granddaughter. And when he got out for that case, the feds picked him up for the federal parole violation due to that case. Now, the key thing is, what we see in the trial, the defense, of course, wants to tell the jury, hey, this guy's nasty. He's pimping his granddaughter. He's a dirty character, because they want the jury to find him to be an incredible witness. But the judge is not allowing Doc's defense team to bring those specific facts out. They want it to be a fair trial, so they only let the defense say that he was convicted of human trafficking of a minor. But since he was picked up for that federal violation, when he got out, this is when he decided to cooperate on Doc Thone. Now, mind you, Doc was already in the right for calling this dude a snitch in 2015. Here we are in 2020, and now he's actually snitching on Doc. And prior to this, he already had a green light from the Florida NCIS and from East Coast. Now, before the situation, he did give the feds Doc's phone number, but he didn't talk about the 2003 murder at all with Doc, because in his words, when he seen Doc in the county in 2004 for that murder, he thought that situation was done. He thought there was nothing he could say, but in this new RICO trial, he told the jury what Doc told him about how he beat that murder. And of course, like many other confidential witnesses, he was getting paid by the feds. When he asked for them TV remotes for the tier, they also put some money on his books. And it said up until the point where he testified in this RICO, he had made about $3,200 off of the feds, and they was paying for his living situation since he had to move around because of his green lights. And his total so far added up to about $14,000 that he received in meals, housing, and cash from the feds. Now, it's said that he did multiple rehearsals with the feds in order to testify against Doc. And I'm going to tell you, when looking at the trial, this dude was very comfortable. And like I said, he was probably the worst witness to have on this case because he was willing to just tell it all, even though he still got 2 sons from East Coast. Now, I don't know their standings, but Too Cool is the biggest rat we may ever speak on Rap News Street Politics. Now, before Doc went down for the guns and ammunition in 2016, a situation transpired with the 7-4 Hoovers that this indictment alleged Doc was involved in. And that's the early morning murder of Reginald Brown, aka Red, from 7-4 Hoover.
Yeah, so I'm sitting there doing all of this satanic shit, and I'm putting curses on Swans and Hoovers and Broadways, and I'm doing this curses and shit. I'm up here doing all this shit. And the homies, we on the streets in my mother's garage in the back. I mean, her shack. She had a patio. She let me turn the patio into a shack.
Now, on the morning of November 13, 2014, Reginald Brown is washing his car on 83rd and Broadway. His wife was in the house, and a lady named Vilma Guzman was walking her daughter to the store at about 8 o'clock in the morning. At this point, it said that a white Escalade pulls up with covers on the license plates and stops just past Red's house. It said that somebody who's kind of chubby with curly hair jumps out of the Escalade with an AK-47, and they end up letting off on Red 7 times, hitting him 4 times in the front, 3 times in the back with the K, and killing him over here on 83rd. Now, like I said, his wife was inside the house and said the shots were so loud it sounded like they was inside the crib. She runs outside and says Red died in her arms at 8:30 in the morning, November 2014. Now, Velma says she saw the Escalade creeping up the block. She says she saw somebody get outside the passenger seat and exchange a few words with Red before letting off. She said the guy had a younger build, and of course she couldn't see the license plates. And with the curly hair, we know that's not Doc. But even if it was a wig, she said nothing about a funny walk or a funny run from Doc. So the shooter wasn't Doc. But like Too Cool said, Doc always got them young niggas around him. And I quote, he said, "You gotta be ready to kill some Hoovers and some Swans if you rolling with Doc." Now, of course, the Ring camera did catch some of this situation, but it didn't catch the actual shooter. It only saw the car rolling by, and it saw when Red got hit by them bullets. So it's truly a partial video. Now, randomly, a week later, the main detective on this case received 2 tips. One from the sheriffs, somehow implicating Doc as a suspect, and one from an anonymous weed tip saying Doc's name as well. Now, at this point, they ended up getting a low for Doc and figured out that he had a 2003 white Escalade that was registered to his name, and they seen it parked behind his crib on 65th. Now, even though he had an Escalade, that doesn't mean he's a part of the murder. Another key thing is that Vilma, when she made her statement, she doesn't speak English, so she gave her statement in Spanish. And she said the Escalade was either white or a beige clearish color. The funny thing is, on the tape, another beige Cadillac Escalade had rolled through as well. But of course, based on trajectory and timing of the situation, they honed in on this white Escalade. But even still, that didn't fully implicate Doc in this situation. And that's when the case started to slow down in 2015. So 9 months after this, On July 24th, 2015, LAPD gang detectives is rolling through the six-pack, and they ended up turning on 62nd and Broadway, where they see 5 dudes from East Coast whooping somebody ass in the street. He said them people got into their car and ended up rolling up to 65th and Broadway. At this point, the detectives blurped them and took everybody down. Now, it said that people got out the car, was scrambling and trying to run, so they brought in extra detectives to kind of canvass the scene. At this point, they located a Sienna minivan and flashed their flashlight in it and ended up seeing an AK-47 in the back of this minivan. Of course, they towed the minivan off 65th, and they ended up finding out that Lil Doc Thone is the one that rented this minivan. Now, when they seized the AK-47, of course, it wasn't in the suspect vehicle that was used in Red's murder. And there's a protocol with LAPD where, for some reason, they do ballistic testing immediately on handguns, but they don't do it immediately on rifles. So in 2015, they have this AK-47 in Doc's rented minivan, and nothing's done about it. But when Doc goes,
hey guys, I just found an amazing digital marketing expert on Fiverr.
The company had
down in 2016 for them firearm charges, he's on the phone talking about this AK-47. And this is when they brought in an MDC intelligence officer, Steve Gagliardi. This is the same dude right now who's listening to Brick Baby calls, listening to Loose Cannon calls, and Big U calls, if there's any. We know Brick and Loose be on these phones. I don't know what they're talking about, but this intelligence officer is the one that receives the subpoena to pull these phone calls from MDC and these federal prisoners. Now, oddly enough, he says the MDC keeps these records for about 180 days, but they're pulled, again, off subpoenas. And on these phone calls, Doc expressed that he was worried about these dudes finding that AK. And these are the same phone calls that he had with Ace and Tiny Bugsy in regards to Tuku being a snitch at this time. But nonetheless, Doc goes in and out of federal prison without LAPD homicide detectives linking this AK-47 to this murder. Now in 2017, Tony Wallace is interviewed. This is Doc's nephew, and oddly enough, he stayed in the back house behind Red. Now it's said that Tony Wallace is from Nutty Block, not from the coast. And initially, they was looking at him as a suspect, but the gun still hadn't been tested in 2017. It didn't get a ballistics test done until 2018. And even then, the lead detective at the time still didn't know about the murder. It wasn't until it hit the cold case file desk that a new detective picked it up and seen that the bullets from Red's murder matched this AK-47. And this is when Doc is questioned in 2020, and they built this whole RICO case on him. Now, some crazy shit, man. They said Doc made some statements about this AK, man. When they asked him how I got in the minivan, Doc said Infant Hood had threw it in the back of the minivan around that situation where them dudes from the coast had went down by the minivan on 65th. And it said that Doc identified a photo of Infant Hood. And the crazy thing is, fingerprint evidence of the hatchback on the minivan did have Infant Hood's fingerprints on it. And Doc said Infant Hood had slid it into the minivan and made Doc aware that it was hot. He told the feds that Infant Hood told him that he was putting in work with the K due to his sister being shot at some point. But the key thing is, in this interview, it said that Doc bought up this AK by himself. He didn't let detectives bring it up. He bought it up after they showed Doc a picture of Reginald Brown and his nephew Tony Wallace. It seemed like he tried to jump ahead of the interview and jump the gun on some facts. When they showed him the picture of those two individuals, he replied, "I know where you're going with this." And then he said his lawyer had told him an AK was used in the murder of Red. But detectives allege that at that time, when he was in federal custody, nobody knew anything about that AK-47 and the murder being correlated. But if those statements weren't enough for Doc, we got the next confidential witness from 6 Deuce East Coast Crip, Ashanti Harrison, aka Devil. Now this is another older dude, younger than Doc, but still an older dude from East Coast who was put on in 96. And at the time of his testimony, he was also facing a federal charge, possession of firearm, and had prior convictions of possession of cocaine. Like I said, all these dudes career criminals, and they've already been through the federal system, seasoned vets, taking the stand. Now Devil goes far back as well, just like Too Cool, where he was also in the county in 2004 when Doc was fighting the murder of Ray Dog, and said that Doc also told him that he committed the murder of Ray Dog and he had to set an example. Now Devil also stayed on 65th and had a good relationship with Doc, but he started to cooperate in 2019 when he went down for this federal gun charge for a firearm. Now he caught that case in 2016. It was supposed to be a state case, but the feds ended up picking it up and he went on the run for 3 years and didn't get caught until 2019. He had a fake face and everything, but when he went down in 2019, he started cooperating and telling on everybody. He even told on the DMV people that hooked him up with the face. This is why everybody got to go get their faces from MacArthur Park. People like him. Now the cold part is he was dating a female who was also from East Coast, and her brother is Lil Rand or Lil Ranster, aka Daryl Hooks, from the coast. And his girl ended up calling the feds on him, telling them where he was at when he was on the run, and is the sole reason why he went down, and pretty much is the catalyst for why he's even on the stand testifying against Lil Doc. Now when he got caught, they put him right in the car with this homicide detective, and they hit him with the, you know how the game goes, you can help us out and you can be in the cut. This is when he proceeded to tell detectives about who was running the 6-pack, where he mentioned Lil Snake, Roscoe, and he also mentioned other OGs like Doc, Limes, Lie, Bone, Greedy, other dudes that he said was running programs in the coast. And these homicide detectives wanted to know what he knew about the murder of Red. So the crazy thing is, Red was a neighborhood mechanic, and Devil used to get his car fixed.
I know ads are super annoying, but I've actually never downloaded an ad blocker because sometimes they come in clutch when I'm online shopping. That's
by Red. Even though Red was from Hoover, he was an older dude. Devil said they weren't aggressive towards each other. It was just business. And he had no problem dealing with Red. Now he said on the morning that Red was killed, Doc pulled up with some little homies in his Escalade and caught Devil outside on 65th and told him to watch out because Red from Hoover just got dropped. Now he didn't say he just dropped Red, the homies just dropped Red, but Devil testified that Doc hit the block that morning, letting people know it's hot outside. Now this is somebody that flipped out of nowhere. This is somebody that said he's scared in trial, he had to move out the way, and during trial, Lil Rand's sister leaked his address as well. So this is another dude with the green light. He said he only had one bad bump in with Doc, where it was kind of like a situation where they both had their hand on their pistol in the argument. He said he was scared of Doc, but he also said he would administer DPs on Doc's word. And he also played a loose cannon role when he went to the weed shop that Doc was extorting, and he tried to go in there and shake him down without Doc. They told him, get out of here, bring Doc back, and we'll give you whatever you want. And this is where he started to become jealous of Doc, because he felt that he shouldn't have to come back with Doc to get what he wanted if Doc was able to get what he wanted. Now, when he first met with LAPD, he implicated somebody else from the coast that he wasn't getting along with in the murder of Red because of their disdain towards the Hoovers.
We ended up getting into it with him a lot, so we started having gunplay.
But in trial, not only did he try to implicate Doc in the murder of Red, but he also tried to implicate him in some murders that he had nothing to do with. And he said he's giving them pistols, weed, and money at different points in time, and he just wanted to cooperate for a lesser sentence in this gun trial. He even tried to cover his face with a mask, and they made him take his mask off. But it did come out that Doc had told somebody that Red had previously told Doc to turn his music down when he was in front of his house. And that probably led to some gangbanging shit, which resulted in Red losing his life. But another thing that the feds used oddly enough, was Kev Mack's interviews to prove some of Doc's statements and to show the courtroom exactly how Doc walked, to go along with some of the testimonies that was heard on the stand. They said that he liked to brag and boast in these interviews about his power, about his big homie and his namesake operating on people, which is why they call him Doc, and about him having control over the coast. And they also watched him speak freely about violence. And the thing is, this is not just for Kev Mack channel, not just for Street TV, not just for No Jumper. The feds don't care about the platform. The special agent that pulled all of the YouTube videos off of Kev Mack channel said he don't even know who Kev Mack is. He had no interest in contacting Kev Mack, and he had no interest in figuring out how and if the videos on his channel were even edited. And how AI is nowadays, all these videos could be edited, but the feds didn't care about that. All they cared about was they heard and seen Doc talking and heard what he said and used it against him, and had no contact with Kev Mack. So everybody gotta be careful what they talking about and how they talking on any of these platforms. You know, it's one thing to ask some leading questions and publish it, but it's a whole nother thing to answer these questions and let it come out your mouth that you committing crimes. Because the feds is for sure watching, and they don't need to subpoena anybody to play these tapes back in court. Now, not only did Doc have the little homies around him, he also had the flockers around him as well. So they had another confidential witness from East Coast in this case named Gary Henry, aka G or G Thing from 6 Deuce East Coast. He seemingly was mad at Doc because he felt like Doc broke the rules. And that's pertaining to Doc's cousin, Stormin' Norman Speck.
What we did though, we stayed there for years, for about 5 years, held our block down, fighting the Swans. A lot of us went to YA, a lot of us went to PN too that was older. Devil, 74 Hoover, his brother Stinker Blue, my cousin Stormin' Norman.
Gary and Norman is partners in crime, professional bank robbers who were a part of the Palm Tree Bandits, a robbery crew that was popping in the city between November 2015 and 2016. And as you can see, construction vests and construction hats were a part of their MO. And it said that they got the name the Palm Tree Bandits because they had crashed into a palm tree after one of the robberies. Now, at this time that he testified, G-Thang was in custody for a bank robbery. But him and Stormin' Norman have bank robberies that date all the way back to about 2001. But when they got out from their first bank robbery, this is when Norman introduced Gary to Doc around 2006. Now, Stormin' Norman was also from 6'9 East Coast, and he stayed in the same crib as Doc, or at least they shared a yard together, but he also stayed on 65th. But the key thing is, Gary and Doc got a little bit closer in 2016 when they was in MDC together. They was actually cellies in MDC. He said Doc was running the floor and of course was administering punishment to anybody that broke the rules. He said at one point, Doc ordered him to do a DP on somebody that was snitching. Gary said he carried the DP out how it was supposed to be done, and Doc replied, "I told you so." But the line seemingly got blurred because at this time, Gary, Stormin' Norman, and their co-defendants, Michael Spencer, aka Short Dog, Orlando Soto, aka Infant, and Edgar Santos and Daniel Ochoa were down for armed bank robbery and possession, use, carry, and brandishing a firearm in furtherance of and during and in relation to a crime of violence, as well as aiding and abetting. A multi-count indictment that alleged multiple bank robberies throughout LA County. Now at this time, G-Thang went to meet his lawyer. This was after he served his DP that Doc ordered. Went to meet his lawyer. His lawyer gave him paperwork on Norman Stormin, Doc's cousin. He said Norman Stormin is cooperating. So G-Thang mixes Norman's paperwork up with his and takes it back to his cell. Now this is pivotal right here Because like I said, there's only a couple ways people gonna know who's snitching in their case when they already down. This is why we have to wait and see what Brick Baby and Loose Cannon and these dudes is doing, because ain't no paperwork being produced. It's just a bunch of allegations, and that's bunk. But Gary Henry was making no allegations. He bought the paperwork straight to Doc and said, Doc, your cousin's snitching on these bank robberies. Doc said it's a no-go. Storm and Norman can't be touched. And this is where G-Thang was lost in the sauce. He felt Doc was breaking the rules and playing favoritism, as sometimes it does go in the hood. Now the crazy thing is, prior to this situation, Storm and Norman was in state custody. He wasn't even down for these robberies. Where he said he was in state custody and he ran into somebody who went down for a bank robbery that he know they didn't commit. He knew exactly who did commit the bank robbery. And he said enough was enough. And out of the blue, in September 2016, Norman Speck, in custody, calls the FBI. He called the FBI, in his words, just to report the bank robberies because he was tired. He was tired of being part of the robberies and he was sick of it. And the crazy thing is, at the same time, Michael Spencer then called the FBI and said he's done. He's snitching. Everything fell apart, man. What y'all gotta realize, what a lot of people don't tell you, especially a lot of these street dudes, what they don't tell you is how it really feel on this side of the tracks when you committing crimes and when you doing certain shit. A lot of people don't tell you the nerves that come behind that. When you go put in work, they can't describe to you how you just looking over your shoulder at everything, running that shit back in your head to see if you missed a step. Are they on to me? What did I do? You know, did I do it right? Or like, man, I made a mistake. They got my ass. Because what it sounds like is Storm and Norman and Short Dog knew that the end was near and they tried to jump ahead of it because they knew they made a mistake. Their nerves was eating them up, and not everybody can stay solid, as we see. Some people are good at adversity and they keep building on top of adversity. Some people are gonna break. That's what we see on every case because people's nerves get to them. Career criminals. Everybody in this case has been in the feds and the state fighting crazy cases. And in their 40s and their 50s and their 60s, they decide to hang it up and start telling. But the crazy thing is, not even 100,000 was made on these bank robberies. It said that Gary Henry is the one that organized the Palm Tree Bandits. He only made off with about 85 racks across about 10 bank robberies. Some of the bank robberies had takes of 2,100, a couple thousand. And this is also why in October, a month after Norman called, Spencer called the FBI talking about he's about to boost the federal agent's whole career off the information that he finna tell him. And you can write a book about it, about these bank robberies. And after he seen that they only made 60 to 80,000, Spencer offered to repay that amount for leniency. But the key thing is, after these robberies, Gary said that on a lot of them, they would go back to 65th to Lil Doc's house, count the money up, and also they would break bread with Lil Doc for being the big homie. And Storm and Norman ended up taking a stand on Gary, so Gary ended up.
Well, I'm not gonna go through all this. It's dark night, and I'm about to go to bed. So I'll see y'all later.